I wonder if you remember the traditional song, Dem Bones. We used to sing it when I was a child. And it goes something like this. The toe bone's connected to the foot bone's connected to the thigh bone's connected to the knee bone, and on. And then it had this wonderful refrain, dem bones are going to walk around. Well, I want to present you with a remix. And the remix goes like this. The sitting's connected to the holding's connected to the object's connected to the seeing's connected to the learning. And my refrain is, those babies are going to learn. It's all connected because the way babies move determines what they see, and what they see determines what they learn. And because the way babies move changes dramatically in the first year and a half of life. So what a number of researchers have been doing is they have been putting head cameras on babies in an effort to get a baby's eye view of the world and to understand how the way they move and how the way changes in movement give them the experiences from which they learn. So let's watch a few of these. So this here is a 4-month-old, and she's laying on the ground batting at objects. And 4-month-olds get to see pretty much whatever their parents put in front of them or wherever their parents put their heads. Okay? Not bad views. But next, this is an 11-month-old crawler. And what does that crawler see? Dirty spots on the floor, mom's socks, table legs. Stuff off at a distance. Up. Now a nice view of some interesting toys. This is a very, very different view. This is a view about space, about near and far, but only low space. Okay. All right. Now I want to show you another one. The next one I'm going to show you is a similarly aged child to the crawler. The crawler was an 11-month-old. This next one is a 12-month-old. But this 12-month-old is sitting on the floor and is playing. And this is a very different view. The child is sitting, holding an object in a sustained way. That object is visually foregrounded. A lot of time is spent thinking and looking at that object. And what developmental researchers are coming to understand is that sitting and holding objects so that you look at them from multiple perspectives is a critical component in early development. One reason why it's really important is because sitting and holding an object allows you to see in an integrated and dynamic way, one view after another, the multiple views of objects. And research is telling us that those experiences of seeing an object from multiple views actually teaches the visual object recognition system, enabling children to perceive objects, recognize them from multiple perspectives, and to be better able to recognize them in clutter. So for the first part of our song, the sitting's connected to the holding and the multiple views of objects, and that's connected to visual object recognition and to recognizing objects in the complicated context of everyday life when they are from multiple views and when they are in clutter. Sitting and holding an object also visually isolates that object. Babies have very short arms, and you can think of that as a feature, not a bug. When they hold objects, they are close, foregrounded, blocking their views of other objects. These make visually wonderful moments for learning. So in collaboration with Chen Yu, we have been looking at how word learning relates to the visual experiences of babies in the laboratory. And what we do in those studies is we put head cameras on babies and also on the mothers, and we have them play with objects at a table. The objects are all novel, the kind of objects that babies have never seen before, but we teach the moms the names of those objects prior to the playing event. So mom and baby play at the table, And the mom will name the objects periodically with the names that we've taught the mom. Then after the play session, we go in and test whether children have learned those object names. How do we test them? We put a bunch of objects on the table, actually 2 to 3, and we say, where's the Modi? Get the Modi. If they get the one that is the Modi, they get credit for learning that object name. All right. Then we can take all the object names that the babies learned by our measure and all the object names that by our measure the baby did not learn, and we can go back in and look at the head camera videos from those play sessions, and we can ask what visually did a naming moment look like when the baby learned the object name, and what visually did the naming moment look like when the baby did not learn the object name. A good naming moment for the baby learning the name has very specific visual properties. A good naming moment is a moment in when the object is being named is big in the child's view, close, in which there are very few other objects in view, in which it's centered in the visual field. A not so good naming moment is one in which there are lots of objects on the table. The objects that's being named, the green one in this example, might not be centered, might be overlapping and with the other objects. Okay? Another property of a good naming moment is not just the visual properties, but the fact that the child is holding it. So it's a good naming moment when you have visual isolation and the child is holding it. That is a moment in which the baby might learn the object name. It is not such a good naming moment when you have very similar visual properties, but the mother is holding the object. Now, why should that be? The reason why it should be is that when the baby is holding an object, it sets up what's called a perception action loop, and they stabilize the head and attention on the object. Just watch this video here. The baby is not holding the object, just sort of moving around, mucking around, and objects are coming in and out of view all through head movements. Babies move their heads a lot. Now watch this one, very same child, just a couple moments later, okay? Now he's holding the object and holding it and looking at it in a way that leads to sustained attention on the objects and the detailed properties of the objects, including its insides. So as I said, this is what researchers call a perception action loop. The perceiving and holding results in sustained, centered attention on the object of interest, and this leads to learning. So what have we got? Back to my song again, my connection song. We have the sittings connected to the holdings connected to the visual foregrounding, and the holding is connected to a still and stabilized head, and that's connected to object name learning. Now in the world, when children hear some object name, they don't get just one instance. This is a duck. They might hear that's a duck, and this is a duck, and that's a duck, and all these various things are ducks. And the other thing we know is that by learning object names such as this, children build internal representations of the geometric structure of object shape. And these representations of object shape also help them recognize objects in clutter and help them more rapidly learn object names. But they're also connected to another delightful aspect of human development. And let me just show you one little video of that delightful aspect. Here is a cute little girl using a bowl as a hat. Okay? So this kind of pretend play, using one object for another, called object substitution, is very highly studied in developmental psychology, in part because it's so engaging and so inventive. And just some examples that children, in the literature, children have used sticks as bottles, boxes as beds. They've used little shoes as boats or cars to drive around little toys in. And so pretend play of this kind is interesting because it is just charming. But it's also interesting because it's a very important marker of future language development. Using one object as a stand-in for another, or being another object like you might be an airplane, that emerges at the same time as the name explosion in children, when vocabulary really accelerates in terms of the learning of object names. And it is also a very strong predictor of future language success. So if you were a parent and you had a 24-month-old who was not talking much and you brought that child into the clinic and the clinician observed them engage in this kind of symbolic play, they would be more confident this child was going to catch up. But if you brought the child with the same vocabulary into the clinic, they weren't quite talking yet, but they don't engage in this kind of play, they would be a little more concerned. So what's interesting from our visual object recognition point of view is that this geometry, representing the geometry of three-dimensional shape, the sort of whole object representation, is the underlying skill that enables children to do these kinds of object substitutions and therefore engage in that kind of pretend play. So, to bring us to a close here, we have the sitting is connecting to the holding. The holding's connected to multiple views. It teaches you to recognize objects from multiple perspectives and to recognize them in clutter. But the holding is also, through sustained attention and visual isolation, connected to learning object names. And learning object names also teaches the visual object recognition system, building more robust representations of object shape. And this leads us to pretend play and fantasy. In development, it is all connected. This is just one story, but human development, human cognitive development, it's like the ecology. Everything that happens lays the foundation for what happens next and feeds into the next thing. You really cannot isolate the components because they're all building change together. Okay? And so I'd like to thank all my collaborators, many of whom are right here. All right, thank you.